Welcome to episode 16 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and I'm here as always with Justin Binkowski. And today we're going to discuss many topics within the Call of Duty League, including the first week of Stage 4 group play. Asim maybe not be able to get into the United States depending on his visa situation, and a potential change in roles with the Paris Legion, who did not have a great start to Stage 4. Before we get into that, how are you doing, Bink?
I'm all right. It's another night ready to talk some Call of Duty.
You're rocking the Pharaoh jersey. You finally got it
Yep.
from Jim, and I don't know, it took literally 3 months to get that one jersey, and I ordered 10 things of merch from the CDL site before you got your jersey. So that
Yep.
Jim was obviously just messing around with you.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah, he
No, but I figured this was a good time to win it because Florida had a good week, and it's technically the Florida home series, even though it's not really an event or anything. This week is the Florida home series, so figured if I'm ever gonna wear it on stream, it might as well be now.
Yep. So let's get into these matches real quick. We had 10 from last week, starting on Thursday, May 27th, and if for anybody that's new tuning in, you guys can go back to our last episode, episode 15, and we previewed Stage 4 Week 1 and gave some predictions for those matches and who we thought would actually win the entire Stage 4 Major. So go back to episode 15 if you're new. The first match of the week was Atlanta FaZe versus Paris Legion. This was pretty much a foregone conclusion for us when we previewed it, because Paris, although they were debuting a new roster and there was some potential to, make some upset or anything, Atlanta were coming off of winning the Stage 3 Major, and Paris haven't looked that strong at any point in the season. And it was pretty much what we expected from a result. But Paris did win the search, which is really surprising considering how FaZe has done. What did you think of this series overall?
Yeah, so you pretty much hit the nail on the head. I think the maps, like the hard points in particular, were probably a little closer than we might have initially thought. Map 1 Garrison hard point was 250, 211 Atlanta. I think it was like pretty close until like a final push on, I think it was P2. I really don't remember. I mean, that's technically the first match a week ago, so but I think it was like relatively close, and then it ended up 250, 211, and then map 4 raid hardpoint was 250, 228 for Atlanta. So both the hardpoints were close. And then Paris, like you said, they did take the search, and it was standoff, which means this was the first time we actually got to see standoff since it was added for Stage 4. And Paris won that 6-1, which, like you said, was a little surprising, but I can touch on that in a little bit. And then the raid control was 3-1 Atlanta. So interesting if you just look at it from a numbers perspective there. Maybe those hard points were a little closer than you might have expected, and then obviously the search. But the big thing for me is that this was reminiscent of when Express was added to the map pool, and even Apocalypse to some extent. Just it feels like Atlanta uses these group play matches to like try these new maps when they're added and experiment a little with their map pool. So I wasn't surprised to see standoff right away in this match, and I wasn't surprised to see them necessarily struggle right away because not like either of these teams either had any veterans from Black Ops 2, but it was just like I said, when Express first joined in, Atlanta was playing it, and they weren't, the best Express S&D team right away, and it took some time for them to, develop strats, and I'm pretty sure they won it a couple times at the major, if my memory serves me correctly. So, we could see something similar down the road here, where it just looks like Atlanta's going to keep trying this map out, see how it works. But yeah, other than that, this was a pretty straightforward match.
Merck said it on Twitter. He said that Atlanta really just doesn't care when it comes to group play matches in terms of, actually getting a map that they're really comfortable on. And since standoff is in, checkmate is out, and checkmate was one of, if not Atlanta's best search map. They had the best win percentage on that map. So, I mean, they gotta try it out, and even if they're not really good at it, they won't, when they gets to the major, they won't do it. Like if they're losing, 60 to 70% of these standoff searches, they're not going to try it out in the major grand finals if they get the chance to veto it. For group play, especially against Paris, no offense, but it's just like it's not. You're not going to play Toronto or New York, where a win against them might be the difference between getting a 1 and 2 seed. Paris is not getting a 1 or 2 seed. Obviously, after this week, they're definitely not going to get that. But this is really just a chance for them to try it out. And one thing to note on that standoff search is Arcides. He dropped a donut. He joined an illustrious club. I think it was Scump, Crimsix, and Arcides. So 3 of the 5 Huntsmen from last season. Or no, I not Crim. But like I believe it was somebody else too. But it was just 3 or 4 big name players have all dropped donuts this season, which is interesting, but it's always funny to see the players' reactions after having a poor game like that.
I think Brown tweeted, so let me try and find it real quick. Yeah, the Cold War Search and Destroy Donut Club. Scump, Dance, Formal, Classic, Celium, Crim, Skies, Kleenex, and Arcides.
So you actually probably want to have a donut because that's a pretty good list of players.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when Jim drops a donut, he can join that list and probably become pro next season. So let's move on to the second match, which was an upset. Was something that we kind of were interested to see because Toronto obviously won Stage 2 major, and they looked really strong in Stage 3 despite a relatively disappointing performance at the major in Stage 3. Florida versus Toronto. Florida ends up winning this 3-2. What did you think of this series overall?
Yeah, this was an interesting one because I'm pretty sure both of us expected Toronto to take it.
Yep.
But one common thing where I was going back through the scores for this last week that I noticed is that for the series that came down to the wire, kind of as we've touched on multiple times on this podcast, if the team was winning both search and destroys, they ended up winning the series. But if it wasn't going to like a game 5, like like the last series with it being 3-1, that team that won the search didn't end up winning the respawn, so it didn't matter. So it was interesting. In this case, I'm bringing that up because Florida actually took both search and destroys off Toronto, which I thought was pretty impressive. In particular, we saw standoff again as map 2, and Florida won it 6-2. And I believe 2 of the first 3 rounds were 2v4s for Florida, and Florida ended up clutching up. So that was interesting. And then I know on Miami, Toronto actually went up 3-0 in that, and then Florida won 6 straight rounds to close it out and clutch up. So I thought that was interesting, especially, we've touched on it before on the pod, just Toronto looked strong in search until up at that. I think it was like their first match in the major. It broke like a 30-plus day streak of not losing searches or whatever it was. It was something like that. So something's going on with Toronto search, obviously. I'm not sure exactly what it is. Like maybe if I watch the VODs a little closer or something, I could come up with some better analysis than that. But for now, I guess we're just going to have to watch Toronto search the rest of this stage and see if they're able to improve or if teams are just countering what they're doing.
If Florida can continue to do this, and either they're not going to win both searches, if it goes to a 5th game, it's very likely you're not going to do that all the time. But if you can start to consistently win, in the series that don't go 5 games, win that first search, that obviously increases your chances to win. And Florida's been inconsistent. They haven't really found a game mode up until this point that they were completely strong at, and they were able to really rely on them to at least pick up 1 or 2 wins in a series, map wins in a series. If they can continue to do this and find some footing and search consistently, that's really big, especially considering how far they slipped in the standings this season. That maybe they can get within the top five. That's like a big ask because there are some really good teams between them and the top five. But man, it's wins like these, wins like this, excuse me, are really big. So if Florida can continue to do that, man, the sky's the ceiling is really all I have to say about that.
And just real quick too, I know we touch on KD a little bit, and numbers aren't always everything,
Yeah.
but one of the things that pops off to me when looking at this final scoreboard here provided by Breaking Point is that Awakening actually went negative in the series, and Florida still was able to win. Most notably, all four players on Toronto went negative. Bant had the highest KD with a .96. But on Florida, you had Havoc drop to 1.23, which, I mean, if Havoc's leading the way, that's just incredible for them.
Mm.
And then Skies had a 1.19, Neptune a 1.18, and Awakening had a .94. So I think if, a lot of people obviously thought Florida was going to win this match, but I think if people expected Florida to pull off an upset, it probably would have been, like Big Wake popping off, right? But,
Yeah.
based on these numbers, that's not exactly what happened. So that's also something I found interesting just looking at the stats here.
The first match of day 3 was Dallas versus London. Dallas wins this 3-2, and just like in the previous series, the team that won the series also won both search and destroys, and that we've been talking about it all season. Essentially, it's really important if you can win both searches. Obviously, you've won the series. Like that's not like breaking news or anything, but winning search is just super important in general. And Dallas hasn't looked incredible in search this season, especially since swapping out Hook for Fellow, and now they have Vivid in the lineup for Fellow. What did you think of Dallas's win here?
Yeah, and I think it was probably a little closer than some people anticipated. We didn't really know. I think last time on the pod, this was one of those matches where it was kind of a coin toss, right? Because yeah, Vivid was coming into the roster for Fellow for Dallas, but it was also the return of Alex for London, who we haven't seen play since Stage 1 group play. And Afro was making his debut for London as well. So there were a lot of question marks going into this matchup. And I think a 3-2 win just shows that this was a little closer. This was as close as some of us, or at least us, we were expecting it to be, just based on, not really having anything to base this matchup on going into it. So, Vivid didn't have the best series. Yeah, I'm just looking right now. He went 60 and 90 for a .67 KD overall. So, definitely wasn't the best debut for him, but they got the win. So, that's really what matters in the end. They're still, for their first league match with him, they're obviously going to have to work on some stuff and try to progress and get better heading into champs time. But, yeah, like you said, Dallas was able to win both searches, which is a mode they've been kind of, wishy-washy on this year, going back and forth between being good or not. So that could be a good sign. And obviously, Krim is a veteran who saw a lot of success in Black Ops 2. So this could be a team that has, someone like Krim who's able to tell these young guys like some of those strats on standoff and work on some stuff like that. Obviously, they have Rainbow as a coach too. So, that could be something we see play into Dallas's favor moving into stage 4. We're gonna have to keep an eye on that. But yeah, other than that, but a lot of the maps were close though. London took map 1 Apocalypse 250-209. I think that wasn't there like a big delay too for that.
Yeah.
I think there was because they had Vivid DC'd or something.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, and they had the what's it called? They were playing the Twitter
Connect
accounts
4.
were playing Connect 4. Yeah, that was really funny. And then Express Search and Destroy 6-5. Dallas takes that, so that's another close one. London took Garrison Control 3 out. I'm pretty sure because that was happening on Friday while I was still working. That map was over before I could even tune into it, so I don't even really remember. So London probably won that pretty quick. And then Dallas takes Garrison Hardpoint 250-244 to force Game 5, and they clutch up on standoff and win that 6-2.
These are the series that Dallas really need to win. Even when you're not playing well, Vivid, like you said, at a .67, it's really bad statistically, but winning a series like this against a team that's not really good or hasn't found their footing yet this season, like London, I think London's in second to last place, so getting a win here, even if you end up going, say, 2-3 in groups, that's much better than going 1-4 or 0-5, because honestly, 10 extra CDL points, even if you don't do well in the major, that helps you because it might delay the inevitable, and you might be able to, instead of getting sixth in the CDL standings at the end of the season, you get fifth because it's very close. They had a really good start to the season, and that helped them in the standings. So they haven't fallen super far, but if they continue to play poorly, they're obviously going to fall because teams like Florida, if they continue to play well, Toronto, LAT, depending on how well they play this season. So a win here is obviously really much needed, especially with Vivid in the lineup, and give them a little bit of confidence going in to their next week of games. So let's talk about Optic Minnesota, because this was something that we really didn't know how to predict, considering Minnesota hadn't played with this specific lineup yet. We'd seen Major Maniac earlier in the year, but he hasn't been with Standy, and they they don't have a great showing in match one with this lineup. They lose 3-0 against Optic. Optic is, they hadn't played well until the Stage 3 Major. Then they have a really incredible run, and they look really, really good throughout that entire tournament after, I would say, like map 3 of the LAG series and on day 1. And they're kind of just staying hot at this point. They win 3-0. What did you think of it?
Yeah, I mean, up to this point, obviously this was their first match, and they play a match later on Sunday that we'll talk about later. But yeah, this was pretty convincing victory. The first map was Moscow Hardpoint, and they jumped out to a big lead. I think it was like 180-80. At one point, something around there, and then Minnesota put together a little bit of a comeback, and it was like 230-200 something. And it was almost coming down to a play clock too on Moscow, which I don't really know if we've seen it on Moscow, but Optic was able to close things out, 250-238 on map 1, and then from there, Optic just had control of the series. They won standoff search 6-2, so again, we're seeing another team playing standoff immediately in stage 4, and then Optic won raid control 3-0. If we look at the stats real quick, Standy was the only player who went positive for Minnesota in the series. He had a 1.04. Next highest was Major Maniac with a 0.91. And Priest noticeably went 38-59 for a 0.64 KD. And if we look at Optic, all 4 players were positive. Envoy had the best KD with a 1.35, Scump a 1.21, Dashy 1.1, and Formal with a 1.07. So, like you said, this was, coming off of that major performance. Excuse me. Coming off of Optic's major performance, this was a sign of potentially good things to come for Optic. Just building off their momentum, I guess.
We'll get to that, but on day 3, Minnesota versus Paris. So let me go through the first 3 matches. Minnesota versus Paris, LAT versus Seattle, and New York versus the LA Gorillas. Starting at the top, we had seen both of these teams not have incredible performances in the first 2 days. Obviously, we just talked about Minnesota getting swept by Optic, and Paris, they lost 3-1 to Atlanta on the first day. Paris ends up winning search again, but losing all the respawns, which doesn't, that's not good. You're probably not going to win a lot of matches if you don't win any respawn. What did you think of this series as a whole? Minnesota getting their first win with Major Maniac back in the lineup.
Yeah, so if we look at the stats real quick, I think the biggest difference obviously is Major Maniac has a pretty good series this time where he has a 1.19 overall KD against Paris. Pull up Optic stats real quick again, and that's in comparison to a 0.91 against Optic. So I think that was like the major difference. Standy was right around the same area. Priesta also, he had a 0.92 in this Paris series, which was the lowest on Minnesota, but that was a big jump up from his 0.64 against Optic. And then Attach also had a noticeably better KD, going from a 1.04 in that series to compared to his 0.82 against Optic. So I think that was the biggest difference maker there, just from a statistical standpoint. But again, like you said, the biggest takeaway for me is that Paris is winning search, which, I mean, I guess it makes sense. They were showing stats on broadcast and people were talking about, I think, like Classic, really struggling in search, and they bring in a young gun like Zaptius, who's known for his search and destroy. So maybe that's helping Paris in that regard. But I mean, like you just said, if you can't win a respawn, you're gonna lose series 3-1, even if you can take the search, because you have no way of forcing that game 5, right?
Mm.
So yeah, it's definitely a tough week for the Paris is winning champs crew, but they have some time, and we'll talk about it later. There's a recent clip that Chrome put up on CDL until that we can talk about later, that Paris might be having a role swap again. So we're gonna have to keep our eyes on them to see if they're able to bounce back. But this was obviously a big win for Minnesota too.
Yeah, Scraps had an incredible weekend of search. He went 8-1 against FaZe on the first day, and then on the second, or on the third day, I guess, in their second match, he went 11-2. So a 19-3 weekend is pretty good. That's
Yeah.
they they had a really good weekend of search, but in terms of KD for Paris, I just noticed that Temp, he had a really good match against Atlanta. He was the only one positive, and then he had a relatively poor performance against Minnesota. He had a .87 bottom of the team, so maybe that was a difference, because they were really close to winning Apocalypse Hardpoint against Minnesota, which would have forced a game 5. And with the way they played Search in the first two maps of this stage, who knows? Maybe they would have been able to pull it off. But yeah, Paris is 0-2 after week 1 of stage 4, so that's something to keep an eye out for. And then in the second match of the day, we had the Los Angeles Thieves, who were playing their first match with TJ Haley back in the lineup in place of Hook, against the Seattle Surge, who were debuting with Classic, who replaced Decimate, who replaced Looney. So a lot of new rosters debuting in Stage 4. The Thieves, in this case, they win 3-2. Again, they win both searches. I mean, winning that first search has turned out to be really beneficial to teams. What did you think of this series?
Yeah, I think this was probably a little closer than some people might have expected, right? Again, like you said, this was technically two new rosters, even though we'd already seen the TJ Halley iteration of 100 Thieves. Technically, they had the little period in between with Hook, so not like, probably wasn't as drastic as a change as adding an actual new player, because they still had some, you know, previous chemistry, at least with this set four-man lineup. But I'm pretty sure, the consensus likely would have been that LA Thieves should have taken the series pretty convincingly, but Seattle made them work for it a little bit. They notably took that first hard point on Apocalypse 250 to 155. I thought that was pretty impressive. And then, like you said, we see standoff again. LAT is able to win that one 6-3. They win the raid control 3-2, so that was close. But then Seattle wins the second hard point too, 250 to 155. So maybe that's a sign of Seattle's hard point improving. Maybe it's a sign of LAT struggling in hard point with this roster. I don't really know. We'll have to obviously get a bigger sample size of that to judge a little better. But then LA Thieves closes things out 6-1 on raid search. So yeah, like you said, LAT wins both searches and they get the dub in the end. Let me pull up the stats real quick. I didn't have it up. Yeah, I mean, Octane dropped a 1.32 overall for Surge, but it just wasn't enough for them. That was the highest overall in the series, and Draza led the Thieves with a 1.11. So definitely interesting. Both technical new players in the series too. TJ Halle had a .86 overall KD, which was the lowest on Thieves for the match, and Classic had a .7, which was the lowest on Surge for the match. So it's going to be another case, I just think, where we have to see more from both of these teams with this lineup to get a better gauge on how they'll be performing throughout the rest of the year.
I'm just gonna say it until they prove me wrong. Seattle loses another control, and they honestly should have won this one. I mean, that's been the case for a few of them this season, but this one obviously is the big difference considering they could have, went up 2-1 in the series at this point, and we know that they won Moscow Hardpoint. If they had won this won this control, excuse me, they would have been able to win a series and get another 10 CDL points, which are really important for them because they really need. I mean, even if they don't get out of the bottom four and they end up missing champs, don't finish last place because that looks really poorly, especially considering they also had a really bad season last year where I don't know if they finished overall in last place, but they were, I believe, the first team eliminated from champs, which was not a great thing. So yeah, win your control. Hopefully they'll be able to pull one off, and it'll probably be a really big thing, and they'll probably beat FaZe or something, and in a way like that. That's just the way things go. But yeah, Surge, control, and just overall issues continue. In the third match of Saturday, we had New York versus the LA Gorillas. Neither of us, I mean, in my heart, I believe LA Gorillas will win. In my brain, I know they won't. And in this case, my brain was right. The Subliners win 3-1. The Gorillas, like I kind of thought, they won Search in this case, and New York took the respawns. Last stage, we saw that New York was the best hardpoint team in the entire league, and the Gorillas have been one of the best search and destroy teams throughout the season, even with different rosters with Chino and Vivid before that. What do you think of the Subliners win here?
Yeah, I think this was a pretty straightforward match, like you said.
Yeah.
Most people probably expected if Gorillas were going to take a map here, it would have been that Surge, so that makes sense. And New York continued to show that they're a strong hardpoint team.
Mm-hmm.
Even though Gorillas haven't been the strongest hardpoint team themselves, it made sense that New York wins those respawns. So not too surprised by anything necessarily. New York, all four players had a positive KD. Mac went 72 and 48 for 1.5. On LAG, Chino went 70 and 62 for a 1.31 or a 1.13, excuse me. And then everyone else on LAG was negative, with Assault having the next highest at a 0.77. So, pretty straightforward series in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
Not really much I can think to say.
No, it's fine. We'll move on to Florida versus London. This was pretty much just a straightforward series as well. We didn't really know. What was that?
I wasn't going to cut you off. I was just say this Sunday might have been the quickest day of COD in the CDL yet. We had a previous day earlier in the season that was a 9-0 map count, but this day I think was even faster because I'm pretty sure it was done like before 7 o'clock Eastern.
Yeah, there weren't really a ton of close games in any of the three matches on Sunday. I think maybe the closest was this first map, which is Moscow Hardpoint 250 to 211, Florida win, because we get Florida 3-0 over London, we get a Toronto 3-0 over Dallas, and an Atlanta 3-0 over Optic, although Breaking Point has that wrong in their header. So 3-0s all around. Just like you said, a really quick day of COD. Florida in particular, they have a really dominant performance. Everybody except Havoc ends up with a very positive KD, and I don't think either of us really thought. I mean, I don't think we really knew what to think coming in because Florida had, rather limited experience with Havoc, and we didn't even know if, for sure, if Afro was going to be in the lineup. So, what do you think of Florida's performance here?
Yeah, I mean, I think this makes a lot more sense after Florida beats Toronto, right? Like, I'm pretty sure both of us expected Florida to win this again. Like you said, we didn't really know what to expect from London. Made sense to pick Florida as a safer pick just because we saw what they were at least, kind of able to produce with Havoc since they played with them in Stage 3. But yeah, aside from that first hard point, like you said, 250, 211, the search was 6-3, and checkmate control was 3-0, so that was a super fast series. Um, Unlike the previous series, Awakening actually had a 1.36 in this one, so it was more big wake tings from him there. But Skies actually had the highest KD in the series with a 1.41, and all four players on London went negative, with Shawnee having the best KD at a 0.94. So, again, obviously numbers aren't everything. I always like to reiterate that, but this definitely, especially after Florida pulls off that win um, over Toronto, that this was, potentially had that, gaining that momentum from that win, building on that, and now they're sitting at 2-0, and they have a big match coming up this week that we'll talk about. But they're in a good spot. Unless something goes wrong and they go 0-3 in their last three games, Florida's in a good position to make winners back if it's stage 4 major.
The thing that stuck out to me, other than just Florida dominating, like in terms of KD, was Alex and Search. We talked a little bit about it last week, but Alex was coming in. He was confirmed to be in the starting lineup, and we weren't, he hadn't played challengers at all when he was in Europe, presumably because he had bigger things to worry about because of like the personal issues that they alluded to when he was, I guess benched, or they moved him to an inactive role so he could return to Europe. But I believe he was 10-26 over 3 search maps, and he didn't perform poorly really. There was no like specific game mode like hardpoint. Even in the Florida series, he was 24-18. He had the most kills of anybody on his team. But in search, he struggled in every map that they played. The 2 maps they played against Dallas, and in this one against Florida, he went 2-9. So maybe it's just like an instance of he hasn't been able to really fit in, because search is more about strategy and positioning with your teammates and the communication, whereas hardpoint, he can do more, it's more instinct, I guess, and maybe he can, he doesn't, it's not really a matter of fit for him, but for search, it seemed to be that he struggled quite a bit.
Yeah, it seems like, what we've seen from Alex in the past is he's that uh, type of, I don't really I don't want to say he's like a Kleenex player. Kleenex is too new to the league. But it's similar. I guess you could call him like a John sub, right? Like John is known, at least, in his earlier days of his career, that he was just known as that like quiet guy who, doesn't necessarily have the best comms. And that could obviously change now that he's in the amateur scene. But that in the past, that's what he was known as, like that guy who, wasn't the best at communicating, was usually pretty quiet, but he would just go around the map and kill everything in front of him, right? That's kind of like, I don't want to say that's what like Shots does, but obviously that's Shotzi's like in that role where he just like roams around and kills everything.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like what we've seen from Alex in the past, is a similar play style to that extent, where it's not as objective focused as it is just like, go do your thing and kill everybody who's in front of you. So, that obviously might not be the best strategy for search. If you're able to run out there and pick up a 3-piece, then yeah, you're most likely going to win that round, barring a crazy 1v4 clutch. But obviously, I don't know for sure if he was getting blooded or anything like that. But if you're saying he statistically didn't have a great performance in search, we're going to have to keep an eye on that, see if London's able to fix that with this new team, which, they technically, even though he's coming back and he's played with Shawnee before, he's still, this is a new team and they're changing up half of the team. So, search is an important game mode, but chemistry is also important too, and strats. So, it's going to be something they're going to have to work on. So we'll have to keep an eye on Alex, I guess, for London, and see if he's able to pick things up in that regard.
The final 2 matches of the week included 4 of the top teams in the league. As far as standings go, I know Dallas has been less than stellar lately, but in terms of standings, they're still right up there, and they even would have a shot to get in the top 2 or 3 at the end of the year if they were able to just like stabilize. But the first match, Toronto and Dallas, like we said, 3-0. Vivid in particular has a really bad series here. Shotzi also has a really bad series. And in that Optics series, I believe that I forget who tweeted it. Maybe it was McEasy from FaZe. It was somebody in the COD stats community, but they tweeted that he had the lowest KD in a series of anybody this season. He had a .46, and obviously this was just a complete, a very dominant performance from FaZe. But what do you think of these two series? Because there's really nothing to talk about like specifically in most of these because they were just completely one-sided, both of these series.
Yeah, so I think most importantly, this was a big win for Toronto in the sense of them coming off that loss to Florida, right? Like maybe
Mm-hmm.
some people were questioning what's going on with Toronto, like bringing up similar points that we were bringing up when we were just discussing that Toronto-Florida match. But, Toronto came out and took care of business against Dallas. Now, granted, it is a new Dallas lineup,
Yeah.
whatever you want to say about that. Toronto took care of business, got the job done. They were, after losing 2 searches to Florida, they did end up taking Express Search and Destroy 6-4. So that was a good sign for Toronto, at least in that regard. But yeah, nothing really too much we have to talk about, really. Most notably, though, all 4 players on Toronto did have positive KDs. Kleenex went 59 and 38 overall for a 1.55. Good at him. And for Dallas, Krim was the only one who was positive with a 1.02, and Vivid struggled again with a 0.58. Shotzi also struggled. He went 34 and 54 for a 0.63. And then Illy was 44 and 47, which is a 0.94. So, again, it's a work in progress for Dallas. They were able to get that win against London, so it's not like they had an 0-2 week and it's all like red flags. They lost to before Toronto's loss to Florida, they lost to likely one of either the front runner or the team you'd expect to get first or second in their pool. So not the end of the world for Dallas. They're still gonna have to just work on stuff. And I think the target for them has to be 3rd place. It's going to be tough because Florida's 2-0 too, but that's got to be the goal for Dallas at this point in my head, just because with Toronto being 2-0, or sorry, Florida being 2-0, and then New York only played 1 match, I think. So they're technically still undefeated, even though Toronto's 1-1. There could be a scenario where Toronto struggles, maybe drops down, but I just think that 3rd place spot with Dallas being 1-1 already, they got to try to take care of business. The game against girls is basically a must-win for Dallas, in my opinion, if they won't have hopes of making winners back, and they got to try to steal the series against either New York or Florida at this rate. But again, like we said, it's kind of work in progress for them with this new team. They didn't get the immediate results some people might have expected, but we'll just have to see how they improve from here.
It's a really interesting season from Dallas because that Hook roster change is going to be discussed and criticized for until Dallas is good again, essentially. And even if they're good again, people are still going to wonder if they could have been that good with Hook already. Unless they're a championship, they win a championship again, then it's kind of like, nobody cares because you obviously did what you wanted to accomplish. But at the moment, they're slipping in the standings, and there's a very real chance that they'll start in the losers bracket of the Stage 4 major, which will be the first major on LAN. And, man, I know Hook isn't playing right now because of the LA Thieves situation, but Dallas could really use him. And I don't know if it was really worth it to kind of throw away all the chemistry that they had with that Hook lineup, even if they weren't achieving what they thought they could achieve. But, it's kind of proven that with Fellow, who they thought could, instantly slot in and help their communication and maybe even make sure that that chemistry didn't completely evaporate. Nothing's really worked. They haven't been able to really have any, good sign, like in really anything since benching Hook, and it's really sad that their season has, fell like this. But that's the two-sided coin of making a roster change. You could be so much better because you make that change and everybody's on the same page now and you can improve, or you could fall off a cliff and your season could be really in jeopardy because of that one roster change.
Yep. And kind of echoing what we've said multiple times, but we're just gonna have to see what happens for them. I don't see a world right now unless they flip a switch immediately.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see a world where they enter champs in a similar situation to last year where they're just like one of those favorites, right?
Yeah. It was either them or FaZe last season.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. And then this year, I mean, if the season ended today, they're not really even in my top four. I would say Florida, New York, Toronto, and Optic even over them right now, I think. So yeah, we're just I don't think maybe. I mean, I don't even know where Vivid's playing from. I don't know if he's in Dallas yet or not. So I think Illy's still in Toronto. I don't really know, to be honest. So maybe if Vivid comes out to Dallas and they're all together and playing together, that could be something that helps them if they're not already doing that. But obviously, not sure. But we also, I mean, Vivid hadn't played in a stage, right? It's not as drastic a layoff as Alex, but this is where Vivid's first professional matches since getting benched before stage 3 by the Gorillas. So it's going to take time. I think Dallas will be, in that middle of the pack come champs. But, right now it's going to take time, I think.
Yeah, and in the case of Alex, he's coming back to at least an environment that he's somewhat used to. Some same coaches generally, and then like you said, he played with Shawnee, and he knows these other players that he's playing with now. For Vivid, I mean, he's getting traded, so there's a completely different environment. He's having to work with Rambo and the Empire guys, and I'm sure that's not a bad environment to go into. It's definitely, if you had to pick, do you want to play with the reigning MVP, the most winningest player in the history of Call of Duty, one of the smartest coaches, smartest players to ever play the game? You'd be like, yeah, that sounds really good, especially compared to being on the bench. But like you said, it's a big change going from really not doing anything as far as CDL to playing in the Call of Duty League and trying to face the Toronto Ultra, who have been, even with the most recent, I guess, relatively disappointing performances, they're still one of the best teams. It's just really tough, and I mean, we'll see what they end up doing. But I just figured I'd bring that up now, considering this is a really poor showing for them, and we don't really know how the rest of the stage will go because it doesn't really get any easier. They played London, which was what I would consider probably their easiest match, because I think who else is in there? So they play Florida.
It's New York, Toronto. Yeah, New York, Toronto, Dallas, Florida, LAG, and London. So on paper, London should be their easiest match, followed by Gorillas.
Yeah, so even LAG, I mean, there's a very good chance that they'll win that search, and it's not Dallas's strongest suit. So let's move on to the last one.
That is a revenge match, though. Real quick, it'll be a revenge match for Vivid.
Oh yeah.
I don't know what I just said, but yeah. For Optic and FaZe again, it's just another 3-0 on that Sunday. Nothing really much we have to talk about. I think the biggest thing we can say is there was some controversy. Wow, I can't talk right now. Some controversy around the last Optic and Atlanta group stage match because of like the ping situation or whatever, the email when the server being on Atlanta for Atlanta's match or whatever. And that match was a 3-0, and that was a bit of a stomp. So there was, like some people saying, oh, maybe it would have been closer with the server situation being fixed, all that. But Atlanta kind of put that to rest and was like, we'll play on. I mean, obviously, I don't know for sure what server they played on, but I guess, from a storyline perspective, it's kind of like FaZe saying, well, whatever server you want, we'll still play you. And they got the job done again when they're 3-0. Moscow Hardpoint 250, 155. The search was a little close. Express Search and Destroy was 6-4. I think it went back and forth in my head. I can't really remember it, but I think Envoy made some plays or something like that, and it was going a little bit back and forth. Maybe Scump had a clutch. I'm really having a hard time remembering, but that was the closest map of this match, and then Raid Control Atlanta just won 3-0. So, um, nothing we really have to talk about too much. You had kind of already brought up the stat about formal. All 4 players on Chicago had negative KD. All 4 players on FaZe had a positive KD.
Yeah, so this is the third series between these two teams. Like you said, we talked about it a few episodes ago about the second Optic FaZe series where there was a server issue and FaZe kind of stomped them. But in the first one, it was the very first week of the CDL season, and if memory serves, I believe Optic was up 2-1, and then FaZe won that second hard point, and then the story of that series was essentially Optic not being even on the same playing field with FaZe in terms of search, because FaZe, like, they were so far ahead of everybody, but they made it known against Optic. I think it was like 12-1 or 12-2 in the search.
Yeah.
And again, they have a really this is like a lot closer in terms of express search, but man, just I don't know if it's really just Optic is like it's a mental thing, or if it's really just FaZe is a better matchup, or I guess a worse matchup for Optic than any other team, because man, this is now 9-2 a map count this season.
That first match though was really close. I don't know if you remember, but the game 4 was Moscow hardpoint, and aBeZy made a really good play going into that 4th hardpoint. And that's what, like, guys like me and Josh, we call that aBeZy corner by that 4th hardpoint, just because that's where like aBeZy made the play on Dashy that basically won Atlanta that game. But if Dashy picks up that killer, they get the trade on aBeZy. Optic potentially closes out that match and wins 3-1. It doesn't even come down to a game 5. So that was definitely a super close match early in the season. But like you said, since then it's basically been all Atlanta.
And before we get off in this match, I would just like to point out that Formal had 6 kills in raid control. So Doug Sensor Martin, he was probably laughing very hard when that happened. So that's it for the first week of matches for stage 4. Before we get into the second week and just kind of run through those matches, let's talk about Asim and AquA. So first, Asim, this is according to Crone at Intel Call of Duty on Twitter. He posted a clip from Zuma's stream, and I'll just read Crone's tweet. According to Clayster, Asim was denied entry to the U.S. today because he didn't have his visa. The letter said, luckily this happened now and not before the majors, so fingers crossed it gets sorted before then. I believe that there's a second tweet here from Crone.
That was just a reply that I was pointing out, because some people were saying, like, why did he leave the U.S.? But Crone pointed out that Asim has been in Canada for the season. That's what he said, and as far as I know, that's what I was thinking, or that's what I believe I've heard, is that Asim was playing from Canada earlier this season. So in that regard, it makes sense that it could be a little worrying that he was denied entry, but again, like that tweet said, it's better that it happened right now than before the major, because now that we're going back to land for the major, he's got to get here. So we'll have to keep our eyes on that. Obviously, I'm assuming, since we're online, that he'll play in these week's matches. It should be fine for that. But Um, gonna have to find a way to get here before the major in the middle of June.
Yeah, I honestly didn't know if he was in Canada still. I know that, um, you know, I mean, it would make sense that he is because he was brought in so late in the New York lineup in the first place that, he's obviously not going to just move down to Dallas just because I know some of these Challengers players have this season, but this was in whatever January, and COVID situation wasn't. I mean, I think we've progressed a little bit since then, but yeah, I didn't think that he was in Dallas, but I wasn't entirely sure, and it's going to be difficult. I mean, visa issues are always really tricky, like we've seen with the zero situation with London. He's completely missed out on an entire CDL season this year because of visa issues, and had Dominate not been able to figure out his visa issues, he temporarily lost his job with London as the head coach because he hadn't been able to get to America. And with land coming up, it's more important than ever for these players to figure out their stuff and get there and compete on land, because it would be a really big blow if New York finished like first or second in their group and they had to have a substitute come in for that major and replace Asim, which, I mean, I guess it would be Diamond Khan, but maybe they would pick up a Challengers player. I'm not sure.
I mean, they had the Challengers team, and I know like Saints,
Yeah.
Nato had that tweet where like he like tweeted that he was free or whatever. So maybe things changed over there in that camp. I don't really know. I think this is a different situation than guys like Zero or whatever
Yeah.
happened earlier in the year though. I think like just based on the wording of the tweet and the clip, it seemed like he didn't like physically have his visa. Like he might
Hmm.
have a visa, but he didn't have it with him or something. Again, we don't really know. Obviously, we're just basing this off a less than 30-second clip and a short tweet. And we could be wrong about Asim's living situation. I'm pretty sure he was in Canada though. I remember earlier in the year he was tweeting about losses in the family that happened. He was like at a funeral, right? Like right before a match or
Yeah.
something like that. So it would make sense, if stuff's going on in his personal life too, he was still home or in Canada. So um I guess we're just gonna have to keep an eye on that. Like I said, it probably won't affect their online group play matches, but we'll have to see if they're able to figure things out before that major.
And the other bit of news is AquA, Paris Legion. He may be switching some roles. So he ran a AK-74U in eights, and there was this clip from Crone. So it's I mean, Paris. I don't know if a role change is what'll change, like what's happening this season, but they were, kind of surprising in how well they were, sticking with teams in the beginning of the year. I would say within the first like month and a half, and since then it's been, really disappointing for the Paris is Winning Champs crew, and it actually resulted in a roster change. That's something that didn't happen last season. So they switched out Classic for Zaptius, and while they've been able to, in the first two matches, they picked up wins in Search, and they looked really impressive in that. And they're still winless in respawns with them. So, what did you think of this?
Yeah, again, Chrome puts that he's not sure how
Yeah,
serious it is, but there was a tweet that Trem pointed out to me earlier tonight on May 29th. Scraps tweeted, when you get told you're running the Krig, and it's a Thanos gif of when Thanos goes, "I'm going to enjoy this very, very much." So, um, it seems like it's possible that we do see this role change go through. In which case, if this happens, it would be most likely be Zaptius and AquA on the subs with Temp and Scraps on the ARs. And this just reminds me of the switch last season, right? Like last stage, sorry. They bring in Temp for Fire, and it started out with Temp and I believe Temp and Classic were the running the subs, and Scraps and AquA were running the ARs, and then
for sure.
Temp and Scraps switched like half. Either way, there was some role switch there between Scraps and Temp. I could be getting which role switched to which wrong, but I believe Scraps was running the AR. at the major, but that wouldn't make sense with this one. I don't know. Scraps was running a sub. I don't remember which order it is.
So
Regardless,
either
there was
way,
some
yeah.
role switch or between, yeah, and it seems like that's what they're resorting to again here. But this is going to be the first time we're seeing AquA on a sub in this game. It's not the first time he's run a sub in his career. He was pretty good with a sub in AW, obviously. That's really like when he made his come up on that Team Revenge team that got second to champs in the AW season. I think I can't really remember in Black Ops 3 if he ran it a little bit. I feel like he might have. But the thing that sticks out to me, obviously, just because it's more recent, is last year with the Gorillas. Uh, he was the main AR for the most part for the Gorillas, and then they make that change to get Blast. Basically was like I want to be the main AR, so AquA had to switch to a sub at one point during the MW season. And it's not like he put up the best numbers if I'm remembering correctly, but he's a good player. He's got a good shot. He shoots straight, so he should be able to figure it out. But it'll come down to how him and Zaptius are able to work together, and if Temp and Scraps are able to pick up the slack, any slack that there might be with those ARs. I think historically, I think AquA's a better AR player than sub player, but he's talented, and just gonna have to see. I mean, at this point, it's a little interesting to me that they're doing this so quickly, right? It's only after those 2 matches. We don't know for sure what's going on behind the scenes or in scrims or anything like that. Maybe they just, they feel like this is what they got to do. So, if we do see AquA on that sub and Paris's matches this week, we're gonna have to keep an eye on that, see how he does.
So let's go through these next 10 matches in the CDL. This is Stage 4, Week 2. It could be a turning point for some of these teams because teams that played one match or whatever in Week 1, they'll likely play 2 matches this time around, and a bad week here could really hurt your chances going into the final week of matches for group play and deciding where you're going to be come the Stage 4 Major. So Atlanta's going to kick off another week. They play the Seattle Surge, and on the second match of the day on Thursday is Dallas versus LAG. Who do you have in these 2 matches?
It's tough. Not obviously for Atlanta versus Seattle. I think Atlanta should handle business there easily. Saying it's tough is referring to this Dallas versus LAG match, and I think I kind of hinted at it earlier where it's a bit of a revenge match, and Vivid didn't have the best first week with Dallas, but he's going up against that former team, and from everything we've heard based on behind the scenes, it looked like or it sounded like it was a scenario where Vivid wanted to stay with the Gorillas and he wanted to make a change, but the other guys on the team didn't want to make a change, and he kind of left on his own or benched himself. So, yeah, obviously we're not 100% sure. I think that's just like what we heard based on stuff behind the scenes. But regardless, like he should be motivated to play against his other team, and we could see a good performance out of Vivid. But it's tough, man. Like they with a 3-2 win over London, 3-0 loss to Toronto, like not the most confident in picking Dallas here, but I'll say Dallas wins, but I'm not extremely confident. And I know you're gonna pick LAG, so it just makes sense for me to go Dallas.
Yeah, so Atlanta, I think we're both on the same page that it should be either a 3-0 or a 3-1. I mean, Seattle is almost a guaranteed L in control, and FaZe is super strong in every game mode, so it's gonna be really tough for Seattle to pull off an upset here. But like I said, maybe Seattle will break their control streak against Atlanta and win that series. It'd actually even be funnier if they broke the control streak and they still lost the series, which would be just an incredible stroke of luck for them. So I think Atlanta wins that, and I do think LAG will win this. This isn't as delusional as some of my other LAG predictions, but Dallas hasn't looked incredible for the last like month and a half or 2 months. Feels like an eternity since they were one of the best teams and Hook was going off and he was considered best in the game. So I think LAG, they're probably the better search team here, and Dallas hasn't been stellar in either hardpoint or control. So there's a very real chance that LAG could come out here with a win. So yeah, on Friday we have two matches as well: LAT versus Paris, and the Subliners versus Mutineers. I mean, as far as I'll go first here. I don't know if Paris is even a role change could really you know change how the season is going completely. Maybe it'll help them somewhat, but I don't see them beating LAT here. I think I think Thieves will get a little bit better, just a little more time of practice with TJ, because while they had that time before in stage 3 with him, it seemed to be a pretty sudden change from Hoop to TJ right before stage 4, which could have meant that they didn't have a ton of practice with TJ going in to their into their first week of stage 4. So I think another week helps Thieves and they'll beat Paris. And as far as New York, Florida, I mean, it's really hard to pick against Subliners, even with Florida playing so well in week 1, going 2-0. New York is a really good respawn team, and I'm just not sure if Florida can overcome that.
I think that this is the match that I highlighted in my head when I was going through the series. I think looking at all the other matchups throughout the rest of this week, New York versus Florida has the potential to be the closest
Mm-hmm.
match of this week, just based off of the recent performance of New York throughout stage 3, but more importantly, the recent performance of Florida just last week. Should be a good match either way. I'm gonna go with the Thieves over Paris. I think kind of like you already said everything we really gotta say there. This is like if Paris is making this role swap, it's not like they're going up against FaZe like immediately after this change, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
I guess if you had to pick a time to make this role switch, this is like a good time potentially in that regard, like just based on who their first opponent might be. Um, so yeah, I still think regardless that Thieves should be able to handle that one. And then again, I think New York Florida is going to be a really close match. Um, I'm going to go with New York too. I could see Florida winning it just based off of what we saw. I mean, they did just take down Toronto and they won both searches, so we could see a scenario where New York wins both the hard points, and if Florida continues to win in search, that could be their ticket. So it could come down to that control. But I'll pick New York for the pod. But I'm just really excited to watch that match in general. I think it's going to be a good one.
Three
Either
match,
way.
three matches on Saturday: Toronto versus London, Optic versus Paris, and Minnesota versus Seattle. Um, so I don't think any of these three matches are particularly close on paper because Toronto is one of the better teams in the league. London, although they did show something in that Dallas series, they haven't performed well at all this season, and they're still with a new lineup. Optic and Paris. Optic is maybe the fourth or fifth best team in the league. Paris, honestly, they might be playing like the worst team in the league at the moment. And Minnesota and Seattle. Minnesota, I guess, is a little closer just because Minnesota is not as good
Yep.
as Toronto or Optic, but neither Minnesota or Seattle have played really well. I don't know. For me, Minnesota and Seattle is the more interesting or the most interesting matchup of the day because there's a very real chance Seattle could win this. I'm just
Yep.
not sure if they will. So what do you think of this?
Yep. I 100% agree. That's exactly what I was going to say. Toronto should take care of business against London. Optic should be able to handle Paris. And then that Minnesota-Seattle match, it's technically the closest match of this day on paper, and I could see it going either way just based off what we've seen from both teams. We saw Minnesota get a win against Paris, but we also saw Minnesota struggle against Optic.
Mm-hmm.
So not really much to say there, but we did see Seattle. Seattle was 3-2 against the Thieves, I believe, and they won both hard points. I already closed out of my results article, but I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure that's what happened. So, in that Optic series with Minnesota. That was just a 3-1. Oh, Minnesota. So Minnesota did one, or Optic beat them 3-0. Minnesota beat Paris 3-1, and
Hmm.
Paris won the search. So that means we've seen Minnesota lose that hard point, but it was close against Optic, and then they won both against Paris and Seattle. We've only seen them win the hard points with Classic, so it could come down to those hard points. Could be the deciding factor in the series. I'm gonna pick Minnesota. Just I think that's the safer pick, but again, I wouldn't be surprised if it went either way.
I'll just say Seattle because, I mean, I just more hopeful thinking that they'll win a control and surprise me. But yeah, I can see it going either way as well. On Sunday we have three matches: Florida versus the LAG, Atlanta versus LAT, and New York versus Dallas. So again, another really interesting final matchup. But even the first two matchups, there's I guess potential for upsets here, depending on how things shake out. Who do you got in these three series?
I think that's a good way to word it. There is some upset potential
Hmm.
in these series, but the favored team should be able to take care of business here. I think the Florida versus LAG game, it's kind of one of those where like we saw um previously in group play for Florida, like they were able to pull off a win against a good team and then they dropped one. I mean they've gone back and forth with Paris this
Yeah.
year, right? I think that's like the most notable example. So it's going to depend on what Florida shows up on that day. I think Florida should be able to take care of the Gorillas, though. They could be one where Gorillas pull off an upset. I wouldn't be totally surprised, but I think Florida should win it. And then again, same thing, FaZe versus LA Thieves. I guess the Thieves have some upset potential, but I'm not picking against FaZe unless they give me a reason
Yeah.
to. I didn't even pick against them last stage, and when other people thought Toronto were just going to run away with it. So sticking with FaZe there. And then New York versus Dallas. I guess that's an interesting match on paper with that, Clay versus his old teammates, but that should be a match. I think that's the least close match of the day here, just based on what we've seen from Dallas recently, and New York should be able to handle them pretty decisively, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you on two of the three. I obviously think LAG will beat Florida. And I mean, just to explain that, so there's, I don't look like a complete idiot. I just think LAG are the better search team, and if Florida, and it's very possible that Florida, they don't have great series from, three of their four or even all four of their players like they did in week one, because it hasn't been a foregone conclusion that Havoc will have a great series or Neptune will have a great series or even like Skies will have a great series. And I think a bad Florida performance that could be, as long as LAG play even close to what we know they can play at, I think LAG could win that series. I think they had a really close match in stage 3 group play. Pretty sure that was one of their 3-2 losses for LAG. So I mean, I think LAG can win that. And for Atlanta and New York, I don't know if, like, on paper Dallas versus New York, you think, oh my god, like this should be a great series, but
Yeah.
I can't really disagree with you that it's probably the most lopsided match on paper, from what we've seen from these two iterations of their lineups, and it's actually kind of crazy. So yeah, I'll go with Atlanta and New York on that as well, which should wrap up all of our matches for week 2. I am actually super tired. I don't think I ate
Yeah.
before this one, which has made me feel the effects so much worse. So yeah, if there's anything else, I'll wrap it up. Anything else before we wrap up here?
I was just gonna bring up the we touched on it throughout the recap though of the matches that again this was our first time seeing standoff, and
Hmm.
if we need to talk about just our first impressions of standoffs on this game, but we can wrap it up. No big deal.
I mean, it's fine. I mean, standoff looks. It's just really cool to have it back in the rotation. There's really, I don't. I mean, it's just. I wish we just had a Black Ops 2 remastered, in all honesty, because even if it was not like the replacement game for 2022. I just wish that it was out because I would actually play COD a little bit if it was Black Ops 2 remastered and I got to have the BO2 like AN94 and the M8 and the MSMC and the even like the what is it called, the PDW, which was like super OP at the beginning of Black Ops 2. To go back
Yeah.
there and play slums again because I love slums. Those maps, like, just incredible. And to see standoff again, it's nostalgic, but it just doesn't feel quite the same because obviously it's a lot faster and different weapons and
Yep.
everything. But it's still really cool.
Yep. That's all I was really gonna say was that it feels a lot faster too, even just playing it in GBs and league play. Um, and I could talk about standoff for days. It's just one of my favorite maps to
Hmm.
play. But I'm obviously just like you, excited it's back, and I'm excited to see it continue to be played. We saw it a lot in the first week of stage one. I'm hoping we see it again in multiple series this week, and continue to see what kind of new strategies teams develop, or if there's any new spots that we saw like Major Maniac in the Optic series was like on top of half wall, and he had like a heady that he could see right on the B bomb when Optic went to plant, and a lot of people were like, "Whoa, like what the heck was that?" So, I'm just happy, like you said, and happy standoff is in, and excited to see more of it coming up this week and throughout the rest of the year.
And that does it from us. Make sure to subscribe and follow, and make sure to support the podcast on whatever platform you do so. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcast, Spotify, and also YouTube. So go check that out. We post the full VODs on YouTube every week. So and also make sure to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter. You follow Bink at jbink with 2Ks, and you can follow me at Pres Byers, and the podcast Twitter is at Ego Chall Podcast. Our next show will be next Tuesday at June 8th at 11:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I don't know why that was so hard to say, but yeah, 11:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time next Tuesday, June 8th. On that episode, we're gonna run through the second week of matches, give our thoughts on the winners and losers, and preview for the final week of Stage 4 group play, which will obviously determine what seeds and where everyone will start for Stage 4 Major. And we're just about 2 weeks away from the first LAN of the season and the first LAN since I believe March 2020 for Call of
Yeah,
Duty. So it's a really big deal, and yeah, looking forward to it. So that's all from me. Bink, take it away.
absolutely. Really looking forward to that land, obviously, but uh, got a couple weeks, like you just said, to get there. So, uh, thank you guys for tuning in, and as always, remember to send the chow.